The movie begins by showing a North Korean woman named Jong-seo who is listening to K-pop music from the boy band BTS while dancing cheerfully. Although Jong-seo is a North Korean citizen, she has had access to listening to K-pop songs and watching South Korean dramas since she was a child. Jong-seo works as a member of the North Korean military who is highly trained and skilled in shooting. But her life and other North Koreans changed when North Korea and South Korea decided to conduct a joint economic zone policy. The policy impacts the financial merger of the two countries, where both countries will print new currencies that can improve the economy and welfare of the people. The policy also facilitates the access of each country's citizens to work and build businesses in both countries. Tempted by the guarantee a more stable economy, Jong-seo decided to leave the North Korean military and migrate to South Korea to start a new life. Unfortunately, what Jong-seo got in South Korea did not match what she expected. Jong-seo's immigration broker has deceived her by providing a fake house and job, so she has to start everything from scratch and do various jobs to survive. Every day, Jong-seo has to do several jobs at once to pay all the bills and make ends meet. From the morning until the afternoon, she works as a waitress at a restaurant, while at night, she works as a comfort girl at a nightclub. She continues to reflect on the decisions she has made and feels unhappy with the life she is currently living. Moreover, since Jong-seo entered the nightlife world, she often witnessed thugs or gangsters who committed violence and harassment against girls. Jong-seo repeatedly saw girls treated inhumanely by gangsters in nightclubs until finally, she chose to fight back against the thugs and gangsters. That night, when Jong-seo witnessed a young girl who was battered because the gangsters had brutally beaten her, she immediately beat the gangsters one by one. She even grabbed the gangsters' guns and killed them with a few shots. After saving the young girl, she left the nightlife world and started doing small robberies to survive. Jong-seo had been living that way for the past year, and the robberies she committed had gone smoothly. But that night, she saw the news on television about the theft she had committed. After seeing the news, she began to panic because she must continue to live on the run and become a police fugitive. Jong-seo experienced a mental breakdown because she had nowhere to go home and didn't know what to do. Jong-seo, who has given up hope, intends to end her own life with a gun. But a mysterious man called himself Professor Kim came up and invited her to join him. Professor Kim said he and his team planned to rob the Korean money printing bank of 4 trillion won. Hearing a fantastic amount, Jong-seo immediately accepted his offer to join the robbery plan. Besides recruiting Jong-seo, Professor Kim invited several reliable robbers to join the robbery plan this time. He then asked Jong-seo and other members to use pseudonyms so that others did not know their identities. A first member is a young man with the pseudonym Rio who will serve as a hacker. The second member is Denver, a man who is a former illegal fighter who always wins fights. The third member is Moscow, Denver's father, who has the expertise to use various heavy equipment and is tasked with creating an escape route. The fourth member is Nairobi, a young woman who disguises and infiltrates target locations. The fifth and sixth members are Helsinki and Oslo, two tough guys who were once members of a criminal organization. The seventh member is Berlin, an intelligent man who strategizes and organizes situations in every crime he commits. Last, the person who will be the last member is Jong-seo, who will later use the pseudonym Tokyo. After the pseudonyms had been set, Professor Kim briefly explained the robbery plan they would carry out. He explained that this would be the biggest robbery in the history of Korea and that the target of this would be the Korean money printing bank, better known as the ZEB Bank. After 5 months of research and careful preparation, Professor Kim and his team began executing their plan. The scene switches to the ZEB Bank building, where a deputy director named Young Min enters his office to do his work. Young Min had left his smartwatch in the office drawer before he watched adult videos. He has a female secretary named Yoon-mi-san, who has been Young Min's mistress and often sleeps with him. That morning, when Young Min was eager to have intercourse with Mi-san in his office, she immediately stopped him and told him that she was pregnant with his child. On the other hand, Berlin and his team set off for the ZEB building in a school bus with all the equipment and weaponry, while Nairobi and Tokyo, who had arrived at the ZEB building, reported on the situation. It was a perfect day for a robbery because the bank had a lot of visitors, and a group of high school students was on a visit. This meant that when the theft occurred, the police officers would not act rashly or conduct a reckless ambush to protect the safety of the hostages. After getting the news that the situation was safe, Berlin and his team began to execute their first plan, to take over a remittance truck about to leave for the ZEB Bank building. With the right strategy and calculation, they stopped the delivery truck with an automatic barricade and disrupted the bank officers' communication signals. With several shots fired, the robbers were able to force the police officers and bank officials out of the vehicle so that Berlin and the others could take over the delivery truck. Once all the bank's security guards were out, the robbers asked them to remove their uniforms and identification so that the robbers could use their uniforms and identification for disguise. As a result, when Berlin and the others were about to enter the bank's gate, they could enter without any obstacles. Upon their arrival inside the bank building, Berlin and the others immediately took the bank director and other bank officers hostage. At the same time, Tokyo and Nairobi would start taking hostages through the front door after they managed to immobilize the bank security guards. All teams of robbers simultaneously took hostages of all visitors and bank employees from various rooms and gathered them into one place. Tokyo then captured a female student named Ahn Kim hiding in the toilet. At the same time, Rio had also managed to hack into the bank's security system and close all exit access so that none of the hostages could escape. After gathering all the hostages, Berlin and the others immediately blindfolded hostages. They secured all their cell phones while Rio, Denver, and Moscow were drilling into the bank vault to retrieve the money inside. With Moscow's skill and precision, they could turn off the safe's alarm system and open its door. When they saw how much money was in the bank, they celebrated their success in the robbery. After they completed the first plan, Berlin, as a field operation leader, immediately contacted Professor Kim to report their progress. While Berlin and his team were conducting the robbery on the ground, Professor Kim would be watching and giving them commands from a different location. After that, Berlin immediately blamed the security alarm signal so that they could lure the police officers to the robbery site. Tokyo and the others stood by at the front door to fire a few warning shots at the police without harming the police officers at all. But unexpectedly, when the police officers arrived at the scene, they immediately opened fire on the robbers until Rio was injured and fell to the floor. Seeing the situation, Tokyo immediately threw smoke bombs to give them a chance to get Rio into the building safely. After closing the building doors and informing the police of the robbery, Nairobi and others immediately ordered the hostages to wear the same costumes as them. Berlin reiterated to the hostages not to resist or try to escape so that no one would be hurt. News of the robbery had spread to various media outlets, and the North Korean and South Korean police began to devise a plan to catch the robbers. The police assigned a male officer named jong-seo to lead the capture operation and a female chief negotiator named Woo Jin to conduct negotiations. Woo Jin will work with the North Korean police chief Cha Moo-hyuk in this operation. When Moo-hyuk learned that the South Korean side was sending a negotiator, he immediately responded to the decision sarcastically because he thought that they did not need to negotiate in the robbery case. But Woo Jin and Jong-seo agreed to prioritize negotiations as a first step, considering that more than 50 hostages were threatened. While Woo Jin was communicating with Professor Kim, the police tried to trace the voice and find out the identity of the professor. Still, it turned out that Professor Kim had used a voice replacement, so they couldn't trace his identity. Woo Jin immediately asked Professor Kim to release the hostages, but the professor ignored his request and lied, saying that there were only 4 members of the robbery. As it was getting late, Woo Jin took a break with her co-worker Dong-chul to discuss the plan to solve the ZEB bank robbery. But Woo Jin was suddenly surprised by an army of police officers who quietly sneaked into the bank building to conduct an ambush. Seeing the incident, Woo Jin immediately approached Jong-seo and said what they were doing was risky. Jong-seo said that Moo-hyuk was planning to set up an ambush since there were only 4 people in the robbery, but Woo Jin told him it could be a trap from the robbery team. But Jong-seo still agreed to Moo-hyuk's plan and immediately asked Woo Jin to go home. While Jong-seo and his team were working on the ambush plan, Woo Jin decided to meet her boyfriend, Sun-ho, for dinner. Unknown to Woo Jin, Sun-ho was the professor who led the robbery operation she was handling. Before dating Woo Jin, Sun-ho knew she was the head of negotiations in the South Korean police, so he intended to approach her to get information about the case she was handling. Meanwhile, Berlin and the other robbery members were preparing to face the Special Forces team sent by Moo-hyuk. They have calculated everything to know where the Special Forces will enter so they can immediately block the troops. Not only that, but they also ordered director Young Min and Ahn Kim to do a live broadcast to the police informing them that the hostages and the robbers were wearing the same costumes, so the police could not use any force that could jeopardize the safety of the hostages. When Jong-seo learned that one of the hostages was Ahn Kim, the daughter of the U.S. ambassador, he immediately ordered all special forces to withdraw. As a result, the police canceled their ambush operation, and the robbery team celebrated their success in thwarting the operation. On the other hand, while Professor Kim was having tea with Woo Jin, he said that the police team would contact her soon. And shortly after, he told Jong-seo had contacted Woo Jin and asked her to rejoin the operation. After Woo Jin left the professor's house, she immediately reached Berlin to carry out their second plan of printing money. Before the robbery, Professor Kim guessed that 4 trillion won could not be in one place, so they would use the bank's money printing machine to print the money directly. This brilliant idea would make their robbery one of the most revolutionary crimes in history. While the money printing continued, Berlin ordered his team to divide the hostages into groups. Some hostages would be assigned to make food, while others would be assigned to drill their way out. The following day, the media continued to press police officers to tell them what actions the police had taken so far. The reporters learned that the previous night there had been rumors that the police had attempted an ambush that could have jeopardized the safety of the hostages, but the police continued to deny it. Woo Jin, who had rejoined the operation, said that the rumors were not true because they would put the safety of the hostages as their top priority. Woo Jin then returned to the police operation tent and asked Moo Hyuk to cooperate in negotiating effectively. Moo Hyuk admitted that Woo Jin's negotiations were needed in this operation, so he decided to work with her. That day when Woo Jin called the professor back, he diverted the conversation by asking Woo Jin personal questions. From the interaction, Woo Jin guessed that the robbers were starting to lose their confidence as she was sure that the robbers would soon go out to get new food supplies. But what happened was that Professor Kim deliberately asked useless questions to buy time until the money printing process was complete. Meanwhile, Moscow ordered Director Young Min and several other hostages to drill into the ground to create an escape route. There was an argument between Denver and Young Min because of Young Min's offensive words, but Berlin immediately stopped the fight and took Denver to another room. Berlin then tried to calm Denver and asked him to control his emotions so that this robbery could run smoothly. While Moscow was away with Denver in another room, Young Min invited the other hostages to devise a plan to send a signal to the police. Young Min suddenly grabbed a shovel and hit one of the hostages' hands to distract Moscow and Denver. He then used the opportunity to go to his room to retrieve the smartwatch he kept in his office. However, Young Min's action was noticed by Tokyo, who was patrolling around the room at the time. After the incident was reported to Berlin, Berlin ordered his team to gather the hostages and divide them into two groups, North Korea and South Korea. After everyone gathered with their respective groups, Ane Kim came out of the line and said she was not included in the two groups. Hearing this, Berlin, who realized that Ane Kim was the ambassador's daughter, immediately ordered Ryo to confine Ane to another room. Berlin then told the hostages that if a North Korean made a mistake, the South Korean group would receive punishment and vice versa. Therefore, he emphasized to all hostages to keep an eye on each other so that no hostage would do anything wrong. Upon hearing the announcement, Tokyo immediately approached Berlin and protested the decision he had made because Professor Kim had forbidden them to split the hostages. Tokyo was worried that the divisions would provoke a riot among the hostages and the robbery might fail. But Berlin assured them that they had to spread fear among the hostages so that the hostages would not act recklessly. That afternoon when the hostages were about to eat together, Young Min whispered to Mi-san and told her about the smartwatch he had hidden in his work drawer. Young Min asked Mi-san to find a reason and take the smartwatch to ask the police for help. Mi-san refused because it was very risky, but Young Min continued to convince her and promised to marry her after they left the place. Seeing Young Min and Mi-san's suspicious movements, Denver approached them and asked what they were arguing about. Young Min then tells Denver that Mi-san is in the middle of something and needs a place to rest. Denver took Mi-san to the room where Ane was kept and asked her to sleep there. Upon Mi-san's arrival in the room, she asked Ane for help to distract the attention of the robbers' members guarding the area so that she could take the smartwatch to the director's office. Ane agreed and tried to tempt Ryo, watching them, to go to the toilet together. Mi-san then used the opportunity to go to the director's office and look for the smartwatch in Young Min's drawer. At the same time, Ane also tried to buy time by asking Ryo to kiss her intimately before they returned to the confinement room. After finding the smartwatch, Mi-san immediately sent a signal to the police so that the police could find out her position. Unfortunately, Denver suddenly entered the room, so Mi-san had to deactivate the smartwatch and hide it from Denver. When Denver began to suspect her, Mi-san argued that she was looking for food because she was starving. Hearing that, Denver kindly offered some snacks and bread to her, and his suspicions immediately disappeared. On the other hand, Ane also failed to outwit Ryo because she couldn't use the weapon, so he returned to arrest her and take her back to the isolation room. The police tracked the short signal sent by Mi-san, and Woo Jin was convinced that it was sent by one of the hostages. But because the signal was so short, Woo Jin immediately contacted Professor Kim to ensure the hostages were okay. From the interaction, Woo Jin was relieved that the robbers still didn't know about the signal sent by one of the hostages. After learning about the smartwatch, Jong-seo, the head of hacking, proposed that they send a link that could bring up location information and capture video through the smartwatch. After Denver heard Mi-san's story, he went straight to Young Min and vented his anger at him because he was not responsible for Mi-san's pregnancy. Mi-san then tried to break up the two of them and used the opportunity to insert a smartwatch into Young Min's pants. On the other hand, Professor Kim was suspicious because the police still hadn't contacted him for further negotiation, so he contacted Ryo to ask about the situation in the building. After Ryo reported that the situation was safe, Professor Kim felt something was wrong, so he contacted Woo Jin and invited her to dinner. Meanwhile, Young Min tried to make an excuse to go to the bathroom so he could activate the smartwatch. But Denver was suspicious of Young Min, so he forced him to keep the bathroom door open. At the same time, Woo Jin met Soon-ho, or Professor Kim, to eat sandwiches while talking. Professor Kim tried getting Woo Jin's information regarding the robbery case, but the attempt still failed. One moment, Woo Jin received a call from the police team, and Professor Kim immediately pretended to leave the place to eavesdrop on her conversation. Woo Jin received news from Jong-seo that they had successfully sent the link and tapped the sound from Young Min's smartwatch. But when Woo Jin realized that Professor was eavesdropping on her conversation, she immediately ended the call and asked why he was doing that. Professor Kim argued that he was just afraid that Woo Jin was having an affair with another man and just wanted to ensure that. After Woo Jin left the professor's house, Professor Kim immediately contacted Berlin and told him about the smartwatch owned by one of the hostages. Hearing this, Berlin immediately ordered all team members to gather all the hostages and check each hostage one by one. The situation made Young Min nervous, so he asked Mi-san to help cover the guard's view so he could activate his smartwatch. As a result, the police team managed to hear the conversation and spy on the events in the building through the smartwatch. Berlin asked Young Min to check on the hostages one by one, so Young Min immediately handed the smartwatch to Mi-san secretly. Using a metal detector, Young Min began to scan each person in order, and when it was Mi-young's turn to scan Mi-san, he tried to be careful so that the watch would not be detected. Unfortunately, Berlin realized this action, so he immediately scanned Mi-san for the second time. At first, Mi-san almost escaped Berlin's observation, but unexpectedly, the smartwatch fell out of her clothes, so Berlin immediately ordered his members to punish Mi-san. Berlin immediately destroyed the watch, so the police surveillance signal was cut off, but they managed to get a video of what happened in the building. Professor Kim, who had gotten the report about the watch, immediately contacted Woo Jin and warned that he would not tolerate a second occurrence. On the other hand, Berlin, who felt annoyed, immediately ordered Denver to execute Mi-san, but Denver refused and told him that Mi-san was pregnant. Unfortunately, Berlin ignored Denver's pleas and still forced him to execute Mi-san so that Denver had no choice but to follow Berlin's words. Denver then took Mi-san to a room and began interrogating whether Mi-san was pregnant. Denver was so angry that Mi-san had lied to him and had played with his feelings that he opened fire on her. When the gunshot was heard throughout the room, Tokyo and the hostages were shocked and didn't expect that Mi-san was actually killed. Afterward, Berlin approached Young Min and said that he knew the mastermind of all these events was Young Min, but Berlin would not punish him. Berlin believes that Mi-san's death is enough to punish him and spread fear among the hostages. After knowing that, the other hostages started blaming Young Min for what happened to Mi-san. Berlin then came to the room where Denver executed Mi-san to ensure she was dead. Tokyo, who felt that Berlin's actions were a mistake, intended to contact Professor Kim to tell him about the murder committed by Berlin. But Berlin immediately stopped Tokyo and asked her not to mess up this robbery because he executed it so their plan could run smoothly. When Professor Kim contacted Berlin, he chose to hide the truth about Mi-san's death and said that he only gave a little warning to the hostages. Professor Kim then asked Ryo to do a data trace on the smartwatch they found so that they could find out what data the police had obtained. Frustrated by Berlin's actions, Tokyo decided to go to Denver and examine Mi-san's corpse. But when Tokyo arrived in the room, she finally learned Denver's secret that Mi-san was pretending to be dead. It turns out that when Denver was about to shoot Mi-san, he decided to shoot her leg and pretend that he had executed her in front of Berlin. Seeing Mi-san's severe injuries, Tokyo then tried to help Mi-san and treat her leg wounds. Denver then asked Tokyo how they would solve this problem so that Berlin wouldn't find out. Tokyo then invited Denver to devise a plan to report this incident to Professor Kim and remove Berlin from the chairman's position. But before they get rid of Berlin, they both must get rid of Helsinki and Oslo first because Tokyo believes those two people will support Berlin. On the other hand, the police team analyzes a short video they got from Young Min's smartwatch. In the video, they got an image of one of the robbers, Ryo, so they immediately tracked his identity. After further investigation, they found that Ryo was a 22-year-old former medical student named Han Joseph. After learning that Ryo was an excellent hacker, Woo Jin concluded that the robbery team had prepared their plan very carefully. That means the robbery members had come to the ZEB bank building to survey the location, so Woo Jin immediately ordered Dong-chul to check the CCTV footage before the robbery occurred. Meanwhile, Moscow is trying to dig up an escape route that the robbery team will use to escape. It turns out that the escape route dug by the hostages earlier was just a trick so that the robbery team could distract the police during the escape. After the shooting of Mi-san, the hostages began to be hostile toward each other, making Moscow, who previously knew nothing about Mi-san's shooting, feel suspicious. Berlin asked Denver to explain what had happened to Mi-san to Moscow, but Denver chose to change the subject so that his father would not think he had committed murder. Then when Berlin saw Tokyo, who suddenly left, Denver ordered Oslo to follow Tokyo. But Tokyo realized Oslo was following her, so she and Denver used the opportunity to beat Oslo. On the other hand, Mi-san, who was still seriously injured, secretly went to a room and wrote a message to Young Min to tell him that she was still alive. Helsinki, who was on patrol, heard the sound from the room and immediately walked into the room to check. Fortunately, Tokyo arrived on time and stopped Helsinki so that Mi-san was saved. After Ryo hacked into the data history on Young Min's smartwatch, he said there was only a short snippet of video, so they had nothing to worry about. But Berlin still couldn't be utterly relieved because he was afraid that the face of one of the robbery members would appear in the video. Unfortunately, what Berlin feared happened. The police team traced Rio's information and Nairobi's identity from the CCTV footage on the day before the robbery. During Berlin's worries, Tokyo suddenly pointed a gun at Berlin and forced him to report the Misan incident to Professor Kim. However, Berlin insists that the decision he has made is the right one so that they can ensure that other hostages do not make the same mistake. Tokyo then asked all members to vote to determine whether Berlin's actions were correct. Not long after, Nairobi, who had just returned from the money printing room, was confused about what had happened. Tokyo informed her that Berlin had violated the rules by Professor Kim, where he killed one of the hostages and created divisions among the hostages. When Professor Kim suddenly contacts them, Tokyo forces Berlin to confess what he has done to Professor Kim. Berlin had no choice but to admit that he had killed a hostage because the hostage had committed an act that could threaten the success of their robbery. Hearing Berlin's confession, Professor Kim was visibly shocked because, from the beginning, he had emphasized to all members that they were not allowed to kill anyone. The disappointed Professor Kim was forced to tell his team that the police had traced the identity of Rio and Nairobi. Hearing the news, all members of the robbers began to panic, especially Rio, who was afraid that his parents would find out that he was a robber. Berlin also reiterated to all his members that this incident could happen because the hostages considered them weak, so they needed to be firm in front of the hostages. Hearing this, Nairobi began to agree with Berlin's actions and chose to side with him, while Rio became increasingly panicked and began arguing with Denver. From the argument, Moscow finally found out that Denver, his son, had killed someone, and the incident made Moscow feel very guilty. Denver tried to explain to Moscow, but Moscow, who was already disappointed with Denver, ignored his explanation and scolded him. Unexpectedly, Moscow quietly opened the main door of the bank building and intended to surrender to the police. Woo Jin, who saw the incident, ordered the special forces to approach the building area so that she could check the situation. Denver, who did not want his father to be arrested by the police, ran after Moscow to bring him back into the building. Moscow planned to turn himself in and confess that he had murdered so that Denver would not have to bear the punishment for the murder. But Denver immediately stopped him and told him that he didn't kill anyone in the robbery. Seeing the events in front of the building, Berlin executed a plan to save Moscow and Denver. Berlin told young men and several hostages to get out of the building along with Tokyo so that the police team would not open fire. As a result, when the hostages appeared in front of the building, Woo Jin and the police team became confused because they couldn't figure out who the real robbers were. Tokyo put a mask on Moscow and told him that Misan was still alive. But Rio, who heard that, became very upset because Denver had lied to Berlin, so there was an argument between them. Young men, who saw the incident, grabbed Rio's gun and pointed it at Tokyo. The police team thought the person who resisted was a member of the robbers, so they accidentally opened fire on young men. Woo Jin and the police team couldn't do much when they found out that the man who was shot by the police was Young Min, the director of the money printing bank. Tokyo then ordered the other members to bring Young Min into the building and asked Rio to treat him immediately, considering that Rio was a medical student. Meanwhile, Woo Jin contacted Professor Kim and requested that Young Min be handed over to the police so he could be rushed to the hospital. However, since the professor refused, Woo Jin asked permission to allow the medical team to enter the building and perform surgery on Young Min. After Moo Hyuk found out they had received approval from Professor Kim, Moo Hyuk planned to enter the building and disguise himself as one of the medical staff. Professor Kim then informed Berlin about the medical team entering the building and performing surgery on Young Min. Although Berlin initially objected because it was too risky, he had no choice but to follow the professor's orders. On the other hand, Moo Hyuk had prepared sophisticated equipment to spy on all the activities in the building when he would go undercover later. During the chaos, Denver took Moscow to the room where Misan was kept to prove that she was alive. Seeing Misan's poor condition, Moscow and Denver felt very sorry, but they couldn't do much as long as Berlin was still in charge. Not long after, Rio and Tokyo came to the room to check the gunshot wound in Misan's leg. Tokyo then asked Rio to perform surgery on Misan when the medical team entered the building later, but Rio refused because he was afraid that Berlin would find out about the incident. Misan, who woke up, immediately asked why the medical team was allowed to enter the building, and Denver was forced to tell her that Young Min had been shot. Hearing that, Misan then gave a piece of paper she had previously written for Denver to hand over the message to Young Min. At the same time, Woo Jin and the police team planned to use the duration of Young Min's surgery as a diversion to send special forces into the building through the ventilation shaft. When the medical team arrives, Woo Jin asks them to buy as much time as possible so that the special forces can enter the building safely. It turns out that Woo Jin and the police team were planning to launch a raid after ensuring that the hostages were secured. Before entering the building with the medical team, Moo Hyuk put on his surveillance goggles so that they could keep an eye on the entire robbery team. As Moo Hyuk and the medical team entered the building, Tokyo ordered the hostages to put on their masks and welcome the medical team. While the robbery team is searching for Woo Jin at the main door, they suspect Moo Hyuk's glasses, but since they only look like regular glasses, they leave them alone. On the other hand, the special forces began to sneak into the building through the ventilation shaft, wearing the same costumes as the robbers so they wouldn't be suspected. While Young Min's surgery was being performed, Berlin kept watching them and suspected Moo Hyuk's strange movements. Berlin orders Moo Hyuk to take the surgeon's place and continue the surgery, so the increasingly cornered Moo Hyuk decides to confess that he is a policeman. Moo Hyuk claimed that it was part of the security procedure, so he was assigned to accompany the medical team and see the condition of the hostages. Hearing this, Professor Kim, who was watching from the CCTV camera, became suspicious and asked Ryo to continue surveillance. At the same time, the police special forces arrived in the building and began infiltrating through the vents in the cafeteria. In addition to the police team conducting the infiltration secretly, Denver took some medical equipment and medical drugs so that Berlin and the other robbers' members would know about it. Finally, the professor realized that there was a surveillance camera in Moo Hyuk's glasses, so he suspected that there was a police force that was conducting an infiltration elsewhere. Professor Kim informed the field team about it and began executing Professor Kim's backup plan. When Moo Hyuk and the medical team were about to go out to the main door, Moo Hyuk looked surprised to see that the masks worn by all the hostages had changed. Moo Hyuk panicked, and Woo Jin, who saw the incident, ordered all special forces to cancel the infiltration. On the other hand, Tokyo and Nairobi began combing each room with Oslo to ensure that the special forces sent by the police had left the building. After the room was confirmed safe, Ryo immediately reported that the situation was under control and informed that Professor Kim's secret mission had been carried out. Professor Kim had ordered Ryo to tap Moo Hyuk's cell phone while it was being searched at the checkpoint at the main door. As a result, when Moo Hyuk returned to the police tent in fear, he did not realize that the robbers had tapped his cell phone. After the medical team left, Berlin ordered his members to take the hostages back to the holding room. Seeing Ryo's strange movements, Berlin was suspicious of Ryo and thought he had something to hide. Meanwhile, Denver and Moscow were anesthetizing Mi-san so Ryo could perform surgery on her when he arrived later. But when Tokyo was about to pick up Ryo, she found that Berlin had detained him and forced Ryo to tell him what they were hiding. On the other hand, Mi-san again asked Denver about Young Min's condition and his response to the letter she had previously sent. Denver, who had fallen in love with Mi-san, lied by saying that Young Min had received the letter. Not long after, Berlin and Helsinki entered the room and intended to kill Mi-san. But Denver certainly wouldn't let that happen, so he tried to stop Berlin from protecting Mi-san. At that moment, Mi-san suddenly had a seizure because the gunshot wound that she had experienced was getting worse. Seeing this incident, Tokyo immediately asked Ryo to handle Mi-san and perform surgery on her to save her life. Although Ryo initially seemed hesitant because he had severe trauma to blood, he finally decided to do the surgery. After Mi-san's successful surgery, Tokyo approached Ryo, who was vomiting in the bathroom, and tried to calm him down. Their conversation shows that Ryo has feared blood since he was a child, but he was forced to major in medicine because his parents were doctors. That made Ryo rebel against his parents and leave his home to pursue the field he loved. On the other hand, Mi-san, who had regained consciousness, found that Denver was still in that place to accompany her. Seeing the attention given by Denver, Mi-san was grateful to him and began to have feelings for Denver. After Professor Kim learned that Mi-san was still alive, he was relieved and immediately asked Tokyo to lead the robbery operation. Professor Kim also asked them to lock Berlin in a room because his actions violated important regulations. On the other hand, the media began to report the shooting carried out by the police team and spread the news that Woo Jin, as the operations leader, had failed to protect the hostages. Woo Jin, tired of the long day, returned home to care for her mother and daughter alone. Woo Jin was a single parent because her husband had decided to separate from her, and Professor Kim also knew it. Professor Kim, who knew that the news and the media saddened Woo Jin, also tried to comfort her by inviting her to sleep together. The following day, Woo Jin went to the district court to attend a hearing to get custody of her daughter, Mina. Woo Jin's ex-husband is a public official named Song Man, and it is known that he is currently running as a South Korean presidential candidate. On the other hand, Moo Hyuk was trying to contact one of the Special Forces members who were still inside the bank building. It turned out that a Special Forces member named Park Chol-woo had desperately infiltrated the building and successfully disguised himself as one of the hostages. That night, the South Korean Prime Minister came to see Moo Hyuk and asked about the progress of the robbery case because various parties had urged them to conduct an ambush. But Moo Hyuk tries to convince the Prime Minister to give them more time because, currently, one of the Special Forces members has managed to infiltrate the building. Hearing this, the Prime Minister informed that the robbers had most likely used Woo Jin in this robbery. This is because, based on the information from the reconnaissance unit, the robbers have been investigating every officer who will be assigned in this case, so it is likely that Woo Jin's assignment, in this case, is part of the robbers' plan. The Prime Minister then emphasized that the police team must handle this case as soon as possible before the meeting of state officials is held. This robbery is not ordinary but could threaten the country's economy. Later that night, when all the guards were asleep, Park Chul-woo quietly left the room to contact the police headquarters. During the communication, Moo Hyuk asked Chul-woo to find out the leader of the robbers, who was often dubbed Professor Kim by the other robbers' members. The two did not know that Professor Kim was not in the field and only monitored from a different place. The next day, Nairobi announced to the hostages that Berlin had temporarily stopped working and informed them that Mi-son was alive. The hostages were very happy after learning that Mi-son had survived and immediately celebrated her arrival. Unlike Berlin, Nairobi seemed more relaxed and even gave the sick hostages the freedom to rest. After spending time with Professor Kim, Woo-jin returned to the police headquarters more enthusiastically and asked all officers to stay focused on handling the problem. Woo-jin casually negotiated with Professor Kim by asking simple questions like his breakfast menu. Professor Kim casually says that he has sandwiches for breakfast without knowing that it could be an important clue for Woo-jin later. Woo-jin then offered logistics and food supplies to the robbery team without asking for any conditions. Shortly after Mi-son returned, Young Min, who had recovered, tried to approach her, but Mi-son ignored his attention because she had fallen for someone else. Not long after, Denver invited Mi-son to another room to change the bandage on her leg. Mi-son and Denver seem to have feelings for each other, but they are still hesitant to express their feelings. On the other hand, Park Chul-woo's disguise was almost discovered by Young Min, but Ahn Kim, who realized that Park Chul-woo was a policeman, immediately distracted Young Min. Park Chul-woo, who recognized Ahn Kim as the daughter of the U.S. ambassador, then asked her about a robber who was often called a professor. Ahn Kim said she had never heard of a robber called that, but she knew who the hostage was and who could help them. Meanwhile, Woo-jin was checking the list of food to be delivered to the building. When she saw no sandwiches on the list, Woo-jin finally realized that Professor Kim was not in the bank building. Woo-jin finally told Moo Hyuk and the other police officers about it and suspected that Professor Kim might have been giving instructions to the robbers from somewhere else. Professor Kim, who overheard the conversation, became even more alarmed and panicked when Woo-jin ordered Dong-chul to track down the car caught on the bank's CCTV camera. Professor Kim then tells Ryo that the police team is currently focused on chasing him, so he is in a dangerous situation. At the same time, Park Chul-woo and Ahn Kim went to see Mi-son to ask about the leader of the robbery operation. Young Min, who had seen that Park Chul-woo was taking Mi-son somewhere, suddenly thought negatively and thought that Park Chul-woo wanted to harass Mi-son. Young Min immediately ran to the room where Mi-son was and tried to break the door of the room so that Helsinki accidentally heard the noise. Fortunately, when Helsinki almost caught Park Chul-woo, Oslo came to the place and called Helsinki to gather in one room. After all the members gathered, Professor Kim asked Helsinki about the car they had used before the robbery. Helsinki said he had paid Hai Jong-jae to destroy the car. Hearing this, Professor Kim decided to go to the car dump and make sure that the police team did not find the car because their DNA was on it. At the same time, Dong-chul also found out the position of the car and reported the location coordinates to Woo-jin. Meanwhile, Chul-woo, Young Min, Mi-son, and Ahn begin to devise a plan to find out who is the leader of the robbers. They ask Mi-son to seduce Denver, who is starting to fall in love with her, so Denver is willing to go to a room, and they can immediately arrest him. They intend to torture Denver and make him tell who the leader of the robbers is. Hearing that, Mi-son objected because Denver had previously saved her life, but Young Min again influenced Mi-son so that she would do it. After Denver got a message from Mi-son to meet in the storage room, he then looked radiant and immediately rushed to the room. Unfortunately, when Denver arrived in the room, he had to surrender when Young Min and Park Chul-woo caught him from behind and tied him to a chair. After hitting Denver several times, Young Min forces him to tell him who the leader of the robbers is. After interrogating for a while, Young Min thought that Tokyo was the professor and the prominent leader of the robbery. On the other hand, Professor Kim rushed to the car dump site at the same time as Woo-jin, who was also driving to the exact location. Upon arriving at the site, Professor Kim had a problem checking the data of the dumped cars as the site's owners suddenly caught up with him. Fortunately, Professor Kim managed to escape from the owners and went straight to the car dump area when he heard the sound of car sirens approaching the location. Meanwhile, Park Chul-woo suddenly manually turned the fire alarm at the bank building to distract the robbers. As a result, Tokyo and the other robbers rushed to Ryo's room to find out what had happened. The scene backs to Professor Kim, who has managed to find the car that he is looking for and immediately rushes to clean all the fingerprints from the car. On the other hand, seeing the chaos inside the building, Tokyo ordered Nairobi to stop printing money and collect the money they had obtained. Meanwhile, Ryo was assigned to check on the state of Berlin in case something happened to him. Tokyo and Oslo then went to the hostages' isolation room to check the situation of the hostages while Young Min continued to beat Denver brutally. Fortunately, Mi-son arrived on time and immediately begged Young Min to stop. But instead of listening to Mi-son's words, Young Min took an iron hammer and intended to kill them both. Fortunately, Mi-son and Denver could take Young Min down after he was caught off guard by Mi-son's threat. At the same time, Woo-jin and his troops also found the car they were looking for and found that Professor Kim was still in it. Meanwhile, Rio, who was assigned to check on Berlin, was suddenly attacked by him after Berlin managed to outwit him by pretending to be in pain. Park Chol-woo, who had found out about Tokyo's whereabouts, chased her into a room, and shortly after that, gunshots were heard from inside the bank building. Moo Hyuk, who listened to the shot, panicked and immediately contacted Park Chol-woo, but he did not get any response. The scene returns to Professor Kim, who realizes that he is surrounded and decides to escape by driving the car. Woo Jin, who knew about it, chased the car, resulting in a tense chase between Professor Kim and the police team. During the escape, Professor Kim recalled his past life, where he had lived comfortable life working as a professor at college. Professor Kim is one of the most genius teachers in the field of economics, and even he is one of the colleagues of a state official named Oh Ja-yoon, who initiated the Bersama Economic Zone policy. After a long chase, Woo Jin and her team finally managed to corner Professor Kim. But it turns out that Professor Kim has a genius escape plan where he will sink the car into the river to escape by diving into the water. Meanwhile, the robbers thought that the gunshots were Park Chol-woo's shots at Tokyo, but it turned out that they were coming from Berlin, which defeated Park Chol-woo. On the other hand, rumors about the member of the special forces who died in the infiltration operation have spread among the police team. Woo Jin, who heard the news about Park Chol-woo's death, immediately scolded Moo Hyuk for causing one of the squad members to die. But then Woo Jin was surprised that the robbery team didn't announce Park Chol-woo's death to the public, while when director Young Min was shot, the robbery team immediately reported it to the public. Woo Jin suspected this was not an ordinary robbery but a robbery intended to gain sympathy from the public or lead to public opinion. Realizing that the robbers care greatly about public opinion, Woo Jin wants to use that weakness to attack the robbers. After the professor managed to get rid of the evidence of the car, he immediately returned to the headquarters. He reported to the robbery members that the car problem had been solved. After everything that had happened, Tokyo felt guilty and decided to return the leadership position to Berlin. Tokyo begins to realize that instilling fear in the hostages is also essential so that the hostages do not behave arbitrarily. Not long after, Woo Jin suddenly calls Professor Kim and asks if the situation inside the building is safe, considering they have heard gunshots from inside the building. Professor Kim tells her they have no intention of hurting the hostages and that the gunshots they heard earlier were just a way to release tension. Woo Jin then tells the professor to report on the condition of the hostages as all the hostages' families have urged the police to find out about it. Woo Jin intends to enter the building to find out about the hostages' condition firsthand, but Professor Kim refuses. But Woo Jin managed to convince him that it was the only way to ease the anger of the public, who wanted to know the condition of the hostages. Professor Kim was forced to accept the request and allowed Woo Jin to broadcast the situation of the hostages to the public. The next day, Berlin and Tokyo gathered the hostages and warned them not to misbehave when the assigned police officers visited them later. Berlin also emphasized that he didn't care about anything anymore, so he could execute them immediately if any of the hostages acted rashly. Shortly before the news, Young Min secretly orders Ahn Kim to write a message about a dead police officer on a piece of money and hand the message to Woo Jin later. The next day, the police gathered all the families of the hostages, especially the parents of the students who were still held in the building. Without even realizing it, Professor Kim also secretly sneaked into the meeting to see the situation firsthand. When Woo Jin entered the main door, Berlin boldly welcomed her without wearing a mask, which surprised the public. Berlin then invited Woo Jin to meet the hostages one by one so that the situation could be easily controlled. After Woo Jin sees the condition of several hostages, including Young Min, the bank director, she then meets Ahn, who pretends to cry to slip a message to Woo Jin. Unfortunately, this was discovered by Tokyo and Berlin, and they both took Ahn away to another room. After the incident, Woo Jin suggested that all the hostages be released simultaneously to save more time. Woo Jin then listed each hostage and matched the number of hostages with the list of all hostages that had been collected. But after checking all the hostages, Woo Jin suddenly asked the whereabouts of Park Chol-woo and lied, saying that Park Chol-woo was one of the bank employees. It turned out that Woo Jin had secretly included Park Chol-woo's name in the hostage list so that he could tell the public that the robbers had killed one of the hostages. Berlin couldn't do much to deny it, while Woo Jin felt more confident because it could be used to negotiate and free some hostages. The incident caused a bit of chaos among the parents, who demanded the immediate release of their children. But then, the unexpected happened. Denver brought Park Chol-woo in front of everyone and proved that all of Woo Jin's accusations were false. It turns out that all this time, Berlin and the other robbers' members have been hiding the fact that Park Chol-woo is still alive. This is because when Berlin shot Park, it turned out that he only fell unconscious. After all, he was wearing a bulletproof vest. Along with revealing the truth about Berlin's shooting, the robbery team also hacked the television station to broadcast the chaos created by Park Chol-woo. Berlin later stated that Park Chol-woo had committed an act that greatly endangered the hostages and carried out a unilateral intrusion. If the police still insisted on carrying out the ambush, it meant that the police had ignored the safety of the hostages and would only use the hostages as living shields. After the news was broadcast, the hostages' families and the Korean people were furious at the police, which endangered many people's lives. Woo Jin could only walk out of the building in a state of resignation without being able to get anything because the robbery team was one step ahead of her plan. With this incident, the public began to sympathize with the robbers, and the police image was completely tarnished. With Berlin's genius, Denver and the rest of the robbers were amazed by the success of his plan. Not only that, but when they found out that Moscow had successfully dug an escape route and that money printing was almost complete, they immediately celebrated their success. Everyone seemed happy, but Denver was a little disappointed that he had to part with Mi-son, so he intended to help Mi-son to replace the bandage on her leg for the last time. At the same time, Moo-hyuk approached Woo Jin and said goodbye to her because the government had told him to withdraw from the case. But Moo-hyuk still hasn't given up, and he promises to help Woo Jin solve this case and find Professor Kim's whereabouts. Moo-hyuk, who knows about Woo Jin's boyfriend, warns her to be careful with Soon-ho because he could be a spy. But Woo Jin immediately denied that and assured him that Soon-ho was a good man who would never hurt anyone. Professor Kim, who heard those words through Moo-hyuk's cell phone, was touched and felt guilty for lying to Woo Jin. That night, Professor Kim and Woo Jin went on a date and ate dinner while enjoying their company. At that moment, the professor began to realize that he had fallen in love with Woo Jin and could not leave her. After parting ways with Woo Jin, Professor Kim returned to his house, but Moo-hyuk suddenly appeared in front of his house. The series closes with a scene where Professor Kim confronts Moo-hyuk, who seems to suspect him as the mastermind of the money-printing bank robbery. The moral that can be learned from this movie is that morality is something that cannot be measured by one or two actions that we see from someone. Because we will always find good in a criminal and find bad in a law enforcer, which confirms that what we do is not our true identity.